Why do we often feel lost, drained, or stuck, no matter how much we give to others? Why does healing seem just out of reach, even when we're doing our best to hold everything together? Carl Jung believed that true transformation begins the moment we stop seeking validation outside and start prioritizing ourselves. Because your healing doesn't begin when someone finally sees your worth. It begins the moment you do. And that quiet voice inside you, the one you've ignored for years, isn't weakness. It's your inner self calling you back. Today, you're going to discover what happens when you stop abandoning yourself and start treating your own needs as sacred. This is the first step toward authentic inner healing, and it changes everything. In the teachings of Carl Jung, there's a simple truth that carries deep weight: lasting healing doesn't come from the outside. It begins when you start honoring your own inner world. We live in a society that often teaches us to put others first, to chase approval, love, and success by meeting external expectations. But over time, this constant self-abandonment creates something dangerous: disconnection from your own truth. Jung called this disconnection a form of soul loss. You become so focused on being what others need, that you forget who you really are. Real healing, the kind that transforms not just how you feel, but how you live, starts with one brave choice: to make yourself a priority again. To stop pushing your emotions aside. To stop hiding your needs behind a smile. In this video, we're going to explore what it truly means to prioritize yourself. You'll understand why self-love isn't selfish. You'll learn how turning inward activates the deepest kind of transformation. And you'll finally see why, in Jung's view, the first step to inner healing is not fixing what's broken, but reclaiming what was buried. So take a breath. This is your space. Your time to reconnect with the self that's been quietly waiting for you all along. If this message speaks to your soul, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, so you never miss a step on your healing journey. Carl Jung believed that every human being carries within them a core self, a version of themselves that is whole, intuitive, and deeply wise. But as we grow up, we often learn to suppress that self in order to fit in, to be accepted, or to avoid pain. This suppression leads to what Jung called the persona, the mask we wear to survive in the world. The problem is, the more we wear that mask, the further we drift from our inner truth. Over time, we begin to feel numb, tired, or emotionally distant, not because there's something wrong with us, but because we've forgotten how to be ourselves. That's where prioritizing yourself becomes essential. To Jung, prioritizing your inner world isn't about being selfish, it's about restoring balance. It's about turning your attention inward, toward the thoughts, emotions, and needs you've pushed aside. It's acknowledging the parts of you that have been ignored for too long, and giving them a voice. Many people misunderstand this concept. They think self-care means taking a break, booking a massage, or saying no to social plans. While those things can help, real self-prioritization goes much deeper. It's an inner commitment. It's choosing, every day, to be honest with yourself, even when it's uncomfortable. Let's say, for example, you've spent your life trying to make others happy. Maybe you always say yes, even when you're tired. Or maybe you've silenced your own desires to keep the peace in a relationship. Those behaviors might seem generous on the surface, but inside, they often create resentment, burnout, and emotional distance. Jung would say this is a sign that the self is being buried beneath the persona. And the only way to reclaim that self is by becoming conscious of it, by listening, feeling, and reflecting. That's why prioritizing yourself isn't an act of ego, it's an act of healing. It allows you to reconnect with the parts of you that have been exiled. The quiet dreams. The forgotten emotions. The inner child still waiting to be seen. This process is what Jung called individuation, the journey of becoming who you truly are. Not who others expect you to be. Not who you think you should be. But the real, integrated version of you. And individuation starts the moment you ask, what do I need right now? What emotions am I carrying that I've never voiced? What parts of me have been denied expression? These aren't easy questions. They often bring up discomfort, fear, or even grief. But that's where transformation begins, in the willingness to sit with what's real. Another powerful truth Jung shared is that when you neglect your inner world, it doesn't disappear, it becomes your shadow. Your unmet needs and unhealed wounds don't go away, they show up in other ways. In broken relationships. In self-sabotage. In emotional patterns you don't understand. So when you choose to prioritize yourself, you're not just taking care of your present, you're healing your past. You're breaking cycles. You're becoming conscious of what used to be automatic. And that's the beginning of freedom. It's important to remember, prioritizing yourself isn't about perfection. You're not supposed to get it right every time. There will be moments when old habits return, when you fall back into people-pleasing, or avoid your emotions. That's okay. Awareness is the first step. Every time you notice, you grow stronger. Jung often spoke of the importance of wholeness, not goodness. He wasn't interested in making people perfect. He was interested in helping them become complete. That means embracing all of who you are, the light and the dark, the confident and the wounded, the joyful and the grieving. Because true healing comes not from fixing yourself, but from accepting yourself fully. And that journey begins when you stop putting everyone else first, and start making space for your own voice, your own needs, your own heart. One of the most misunderstood aspects of self-prioritization is the emotional resistance that comes with it. At first glance, taking care of yourself seems simple. But as Jung often pointed out, the greatest obstacles to transformation are not external, they live inside us. Every time you choose yourself, old beliefs surface. You may hear an inner voice saying, "You're being selfish," or feel a wave of guilt for putting your needs first. This is where the real work begins. Because behind these reactions are deep-rooted patterns, ways of thinking and feeling that were formed in childhood. Carl Jung called these unconscious patterns complexes. A complex is like an emotional echo from the past that influences your present behavior, often without your awareness. For example, if you grew up in an environment where love was conditional, you might still believe that you need to earn affection or approval by sacrificing yourself. That's why it's so difficult to break the habit of self-neglect. You're not just challenging current behaviors, you're confronting emotional truths you've carried for decades. And that requires courage. Prioritizing yourself means confronting these complexes gently. It means asking, where did this belief come from? Who taught me that my needs were less important? And is that really true? This is not about blaming others. Jung never encouraged staying stuck in victimhood. Rather, he saw healing as a process of becoming conscious, of shining light into the places you once kept in the dark. When you begin to see your patterns clearly, you create a space between your reaction and your response. And in that space, you have the power to choose differently. Let's say you're in a relationship where you always apologize, even when you're not wrong. At some point, you might pause and ask yourself, am I doing this because I value peace, or because I fear being abandoned? That single question can open a doorway to profound inner awareness. Jung believed that we cannot change anything until we accept it. So part of prioritizing yourself is accepting the uncomfortable truths that arise. You may realize you've been performing a role to feel loved. You may discover that your constant busyness is a way to avoid emotional pain. These realizations can feel heavy, but they're also liberating. Because the moment you name a pattern, you reclaim your power over it. That's what makes this work so transformative. You're no longer reacting from your past, you're responding from your truth. Another key Jungian concept that helps deepen this journey is the shadow. The shadow represents the parts of yourself that you've disowned, traits or emotions you were taught to hide, like anger, sadness, or desire. But Jung emphasized that your shadow isn't bad, it's simply unacknowledged. And when you bring it into awareness, it becomes a source of strength. Imagine you grew up believing you had to be the nice one to be accepted. Over time, you might have suppressed anger to maintain that identity. But unexpressed anger doesn't disappear, it becomes resentment. It leaks into your words, your tone, your relationships. By acknowledging your anger, not acting out, but listening to it, you gain insight. You realize that underneath the anger is a boundary that was crossed. And with that awareness, you can respond with clarity instead of guilt. This is what Jung meant when he said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Self-prioritization, then, is not just about doing what feels good. It's about doing what's real. It's sitting with discomfort until it reveals its lesson. It's meeting your inner world with honesty, compassion, and the willingness to grow. And as you continue this process, something subtle yet profound begins to shift, your sense of identity. You stop defining yourself by how others see you. You start seeing yourself from within. You begin to trust your intuition. You start honoring your boundaries. You speak with more clarity. And the need to prove your worth slowly dissolves, because you know your value doesn't depend on external validation. That's the power of Jung's teachings. They invite you to stop running from yourself, and instead, turn inward, where your healing truly begins. There's a pivotal shift that happens when you start living from your inner truth instead of external expectations. It's subtle at first, almost invisible. But over time, it changes everything. Carl Jung often emphasized that real transformation doesn't come through dramatic breakthroughs. It unfolds through consistent, quiet acts of self-awareness. When you begin to prioritize your emotional and spiritual well-being, you'll notice something powerful. The world around you starts to respond differently. Not because reality itself has changed, but because you have. Relationships that once felt draining start to lose their hold on you. Environments that used to exhaust you no longer have the same grip. That's because you've stopped operating from a place of scarcity. You've stopped giving energy to things that don't nourish your inner world. This is what Jung meant by synchronicity, those meaningful coincidences that begin to unfold when you live in alignment with who you are. People appear in your life who reflect your growth. Opportunities surface that feel more authentic. And the path ahead becomes clearer, not because there are no challenges, but because you've changed the way you respond to them. One of the most healing things that happens in this phase of self-prioritization is the shift in your inner dialogue. You stop speaking to yourself with judgment or impatience. Instead, your inner voice becomes more loving, more supportive, more honest. You might catch yourself pausing in a moment of self-doubt and saying, "I'm doing my best, and that's enough." Or on a hard day, you might remind yourself, "It's okay to rest. I don't have to prove anything right now." These inner affirmations, while simple, are radical. They begin to replace the old scripts that may have come from childhood, from culture, or from past trauma. Slowly, those unconscious patterns lose power. And you reclaim your authority to define your worth. This is why Jung believed that awareness is the cornerstone of healing. You don't need to be perfect, you need to be conscious. And through that consciousness, you begin to make choices that serve your growth. That might look like setting boundaries without guilt. It might mean saying no to a relationship that's no longer aligned. It could mean pursuing a passion you've long neglected, not because it makes sense to others, but because it brings you joy. These acts of alignment are not selfish, they're sacred. They send a message to your unconscious, "I matter." And when your unconscious receives that message, it stops fighting you. It begins to support you. Your energy rises. Your confidence grows. Your life flows more naturally. Jung taught that when we live from our core, we begin to integrate, not just our best qualities, but also the aspects we once rejected. That's where wholeness happens. Wholeness is not perfection. It's the capacity to hold all parts of yourself with compassion. Even the parts you're not proud of. Even the parts that still hurt. Even the parts you don't fully understand yet. Because those pieces hold wisdom too. You may discover that your anxiety holds a message about boundaries you haven't respected. Or that your sadness is a signal you've been neglecting joy. Even your anger may carry a truth. It could be a reaction to self-betrayal or the silence of unmet needs. The more you listen, the more you learn. Not from books or experts, but from the deepest parts of your being. And perhaps the most beautiful realization of all is this. You don't have to wait for permission to become yourself. You don't need validation from others to live authentically. You don't need to explain why you're choosing to change. Because this journey isn't about impressing the world. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. That remembering is your power. And every time you act from that place, even in small ways, you rewrite your story. Not by force, but through presence. Not through control, but through clarity. The more you align with your essence, the more effortless life begins to feel, not because it's easy, but because you've stopped resisting your truth. And from that place, you start to build a life that reflects your inner values. A life where you no longer chase love, you embody it. Where success isn't measured by comparison, but by fulfillment. This is not just personal healing, it's a shift in consciousness. One that ripples outward into your relationships, your creativity, your sense of purpose. And it all begins with one decision: to come home to yourself. Prioritizing yourself is not just a practice, it's a revolution of the soul. It's a declaration that your inner world matters. That your emotions are valid. That your needs are sacred. And that your presence on this earth is not a mistake, it's a miracle in motion. Carl Jung reminded us that the journey to becoming whole is not a straight path. It's messy. It's layered. And sometimes, it feels lonely. But it's also the most honest path you can walk. Because it brings you back to yourself, not as a concept, but as a living truth. When you choose to listen to your intuition, to hold space for your wounds, and to show up for your own healing, something shifts, not just inside you, but around you. The people you attract begin to mirror your growth. The situations you face begin to reveal new meaning. And the life you once felt disconnected from begins to feel like home again. But this journey isn't about rushing toward an ideal version of yourself. It's about meeting who you already are, with acceptance, with love, with presence. You don't have to become someone new to be worthy of healing. You just have to remember the truth you buried beneath the noise. This remembrance isn't loud. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It whispers in the still moments. When you rest. When you breathe. When you finally say yes to what your soul has been craving. So today, as you step into your own healing, I want to leave you with a question. One that Jung would likely ask you to consider. What part of yourself have you been abandoning that is now ready to come back home? Leave your answer in the comments below. Your voice might be the light someone else needs to hear. And if this message touched something deep inside of you, share it. Let it reach someone who's still afraid to put themselves first. Because healing grows when we grow together. Until next time, stay soft, stay strong, and never forget. Your healing journey begins the moment you choose yourself. Subscribe now and join this growing circle of souls choosing truth, healing, and inner freedom, one step at a time.